All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be chapter two of Saif al-Adel's military Al-Qaeda handbook entitled 33 Strategies of War. Mohamed Salah al-Din al-Him Zaidan is known by his nom de guerre Saif al-Adel. He is the undeclared emir of Al-Qaeda, currently in Afghanistan and under house arrest in Iran. He's been traveling back and forth. No country wants Saif al-Adel, so Iran is stuck with him, and they don't want to let him go unsupervised. The United States has refused to be responsible for him. Um, this is actually in a playbook so that we could blame Iran later for housing Al-Qaeda. We did this with Iraq after 9/11. Actually, we blamed Iraq for procuring chemical and biological weapons with Al-Qaeda due to a forced testimony of Ibn Sheikh al-Libi, who later recanted and said that never happened. But it was too late. We went to war anyway. Um, I'll be reading this manual because it's current. This is the current Al-Qaeda military manual about how to approach the West in terms of a terrorist attack. And I find this playlist to be extremely valuable for anyone. You could be a layman, you may not be somebody who studies this area, but you have to know the mind of your enemy, and what better way to read the manual. And this is part two. It's called Open Horizon Strategy, and this is about the open landscape as a when it compared to a guerrilla unit, guerrilla warfare. And this in the blue, I'm going to read. Repeating useless actions is a waste of available resources. Your interaction with the present moment makes it impossible for your enemies to predict what you will do. Impose guerrilla warfare on your mind without allowing fixed defensive lines or obvious fortresses to exist. Everything should be aggressive, fluid, and mobile. What worked successfully, one should not become a shell that prevents us from seeing changes and advancements on the enemy. In other words, what he is trying to say is be unpredictable. Urban warfare, guerrilla warfare, is about unpredictability, not to be predictable. In other words, don't be like the British Army advancing on the farmers here in the United States during the Civil War, where they would stand at attention, straight line. Instead of dodging bullets, they stood there and waited like a bunch of idiots. Not a winnable strategy. The Al-Qaeda Mujahideen learned from the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, on how to adapt to the landscape by using unconventional means. Bin Laden wrote about the Viet Cong, about how to use unpredictability against an advanced military. And look how the Viet Cong basically did. They held fast, and the United States suffered massive casualties. In regards to using unconventional means in a open landscape, as this chapter suggests, to be unpredictable is uh, to be in your advancement because you are a guerrilla fighter, one who employs urban warfare, not using the traditional means of warfare, like the U.S. military. U.S. military will use tanks, they'll use large, capable weapons, defending against land, defending material objects, whereas the Mujahideen has no such thing. They're not defending the land, they're in the United States. So to use open warfare strategy, using guerrilla methodology, is to their advancement. The world has changed. Sciences have advanced. What was useful in the past is now a hindrance. In other words, Bin Laden's strategy was a hindrance. And he's correct. Bin Laden was not a very good military commander. A lot of his ideas when it came to against the Soviets were not well met. And this is the reason why the Egyptians like Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri, Ali Muhammad, Abu Hafs al-Masri, also known as Mohammed Atef, they were in the military, Egyptian military. They knew about covert means because they were involved with numerous plots, including the assassination of the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat, using deception, as outlined later on in this book. The principles of war and science are using them as an art with skill, innovation, and creativity. Do not enclose yourself within the shadow of your victories in wars because your enemies also know how to succeed. Do not enter a war as if it were the final fateful battle. In other words, keep coming at them. This is not a final hurrah. This is not, this is wave after wave. In other words, this is the reason why I think there will be a number of units inside the United States employing unconventional means. There is always another war on the horizon. So do not waste your resources and capabilities. Be wise and patient, knowing that there is a war for another day, not the last day. See, this is the reason why I think the next terrorist attack will be deployed day after day, because there'll be so many of these people inside the United States to where they will shut down the country. Not the whole country, but a lot of it. Enough where it will hurt us economically. And that's exactly what bin Laden did with 9/11, but this time will be worse because it'll be personal. It'll be in your face, not up in the air. Now I want to fast forward to page 36 from here on, because there's a number of outlines here. In war, as in life, we must control our emotions and not let them trap us. Wisdom and patience allow our minds to deal with provocations in psychological warfare and also help us to keep with the changes, adapting ourselves to what is unexpected during conflict. In the following sections, some ideas that contribute to adaptation and guide us to a military skill are outlined. Here he's trying to teach the jihadists on how to adapt with unpredictability, to not be predictable, to adapt to whatever happens during an attack, an unconventional attack. Because when there's an unconventional attack, it's not planned. I mean, the planning stages are to have the units stationed where they are and to adapt and to outline the area. But you could be shooting at a group of people and they're probably not ready for a fire back quickly or a fire back from a number of people. So for a mass casualty attack on the ground, they will meet with unpredictable scenarios. And this is exactly what they want because this will cause confusion. This will cause hysteria, fear, paranoia, and paralysis, exactly where they want us. And for us to overreact like Bush did with 9/11 by entering two wars. One was a 20-year waste, and the other one where we killed 1.5 million people approximately. To free your instincts and become someone capable of reacting positively to changes, you must review all your military knowledge and update it to according to time and technology. In other words, military knowledge, meaning what they learned in these training camps in Afghanistan. There is no doubt that studying history and theories expands our perspectives, learning our history, U.S. history. But avoid stagnation and freezing, and be cautious not to let your mind stop at one point. Limitation is a valid method, but it is not suitable for scholars and those who have broad and inclusive views of history. Training brings new thoughts to the mind that are difficult to change. In the midst of battle, anyone who does not see the changing conditions of the battle suffers and tries to find a solution for the past that was successful under different circumstances, whether in nature, technology, or tactics. Remember the attack in the Russian, I think it was the movie theater. By, I think it was the Islamic State. I believe so. I'm sorry, the concert hall attack. Um, the Islamic State Levant, or I'm sorry, that group, ISIS Khorasan, was involved in that attack. And this was recent. This is just a year ago. Where you had, I think it was like 20, 25 people involved in that attack. That's a lot for a concert hall. Now, if that's the case, how many do you think would be here in the United States? I predict there will be over 100 to 150. Remember, we're dealing with a number of jihadist organizations that probably will be involved. ISIS Khorasan, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And they used the methodology as outlined in this book. Now, it may have that they were trained under different leaderships, under different jihadist officials, maybe not under Saif al-Adel, but who knows? But this came out this year, so this was not at the this was not available to them. And there were 4 gunmen involved in that. There were a number of other people that were involved with the attack, the planning stages, the handling of weapons, but there were 4 people who shot into a concert hall. So this is the idea that Bill Roggio and Sarah Adams and people at the Transnational Council are warning the U.S. government about. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, the National Counterterrorism Center, the official center, released a spotlight report that I read about in the video. And I showed this to a cop at Grand Central just last week, the report. He had no idea. Now, this report is supposed to go to all local, state, and federal institutions and law enforcement centers. You would think that a cop at Grand Central would know it, but now in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be handing out copies to police stations just so that they could be on the ready. During the Vietnam War, North Vietnamese General Absence had a general principle. He believed that after each successful attack, a successful attack could convince a person that they have actually failed. And for this reason, their successes never break them. They never repeated the strategy in the next battle, but instead thought separately for each situation. This is key because it won't be the same thing. And I'm going to be doing future videos about trying to warn officials here in New York about the bridges, about the tunnels. And of course, large gatherings of people. I'm going to do my best. They're always going to attack differently. It may not be 4 people in a, stadium. It could be 6 people in a park or in a university, or 3 people bombing a bridge. It could be 4 people bombing a tunnel using a truck bomb. It'll be different each time. And you'll never know. Always keep your mind connected to the present and reality. Do not waste your time on battles you cannot win or that will drain you because you might turn the tide in favor of the enemy. Go where the enemy does not expect. Go where the enemy does not expect. Suburban neighborhoods? A store? Leave the battlefield. They have prepared an attack from where you have prepared. If you hand over your mind to the enemy's efforts, respond to emotional calls and follow some of your allies. You fall into the hands of your enemies who will place you exactly where they want you. So where is the brilliance in this? In other words, don't go where the enemy is formidable. Go where you might have allies. And this is the reason why I think there'll be a hard right attack on Muslims. I mean, right now on viral media, I'm seeing open-ended racism, open-ended, not even holding back. A lot of these British, Canadian, and U.S. nationalists, evangelical Judeo-Christians, calling for the banning of Islam from the United States. Imagine a terrorist attack of this nature. You'll have these people out in the streets shooting Muslims in the streets. It'll be, it could be. I'm not going to say it's gonna, because I don't know. If that scenario came true, it would be just utterly fucking disastrous for all of us. Be cautious when consulting with great generals. Also consult and converse with the youth. Present the situation to them as it is. Do not impose what you want. Let them interact with the information and the map themselves. Listen carefully to their discussions. Value their words, then study what they have said. You always find new strategy among the wisdom of the elders and the motivation of the youth. In other words, bin Laden used to listen to his inner circle. Didn't care what muscle hijackers taught in 9/11. They were just muscle hijackers. This Al-Qaeda, which adapts, Al-Qaeda always adapts to their new environment, always adapts with new leadership. Much more dangerous now than they ever were under bin Laden, much more formidable, where they won't ignore the thoughts of the youth. Had the body of an elder and the spirit of a young person, and thus you always remain young and renewed. When the Muslims moved toward the world, just as Alexander the Mongols moved, and Napoleon followed their path, the old empires could not resist them. They were guided by the spirit of youth, which dismantled everything old and ancient. The Muslims were distinct from others because, by moving towards the new world, they advanced with a celestial civilization that was invincible and irrefutable. War geniuses are those who strive to acquire a softer or more flexible power to realize a wider ability and field of maneuver. The peak of this transformation occurs in guerrilla warfare. Because through guerrilla warfare, you will always have the advantage when you're dealing with suburban people, people who are not like, from the mountain regions of the South with his militia armies, right? They're used to that. People in the city, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, they're not used to, this type of thinking. They've never had an enemy attack here. This will be the first time since the French defeated the British where we'll have an enemy here at home. But that was for a good reason, to defeat the British monarchy, who wanted to impose a monarchy here in the States, which the Constitution did not imply. Here, the jihadists want to destroy the fabric of the United States, which is for unity and free worship, for whatever they choose. And the very people these jihadists are going to hurt are the Muslims themselves, because the right wing will blame them and the Democrats and immigrants and communists and atheists for all what has happened, or what is going to happen, I think. This will cause the war that they were predicting, the war with ourselves, because we're right at the precipice. I mean, look what they were going to do for Charlie Kirk. What do you think they're going to do when the terrorist attack comes of this nature? Say what you want about the conservative party. Talk about the hard right. Temperamental as they are, they have not been instigating conflict yet. They've tried through protests of the left, but it's been the left that's antagonizing this. And a terrorist attack of this nature, instead of bringing the country together, it'll rip us apart. And that's what the jihadist is hoping for. But what they don't realize is that the Muslims will be hurting us. But they don't care because they're not Muslims. In fact, the biggest killer Muslims outside of Western imperialism are Salafists, jihadists. All you have to do is take a look at Syria. They are always 1 or 2 steps ahead of the enemies. Do not repeat tactics and adapt to the conditions that arise. Think twice. First, based on what you have learned in the principles of war, what great generations of commanders say, and what the enemy expects you to do. Second, Think differently based on a spirit that rebels against traditions without haste or recklessness, from an angle that the enemy least expects. Then build your defensive strategy that aligns with offensive operations based on the first, and build your offensive strategy that includes mobile defense, making it difficult for the enemy to locate you based on the second. This is why I think if this military manual is being implied to the jihadist organizations in Afghanistan or in Syria and the Arabian Peninsula, and they come here and they employ these tactics, this will make it almost impossible to pinpoint who it is unless we kill one of them to find out who they really are. And I wouldn't be surprised if, some of these guys are going to have IDs planted on them or facilitated to them that will show that they're from Iran or from Lebanon to blame them to enter war. Because a war of this magnitude, a conflict, a terrorist attack of this magnitude that I'm predicting, where even the old neocon crowd even went back on their word against Iraq, everyone will be wanting their pound of flesh because so many people will be killed. And it'll be blared all over the news. Look at the mass deaths here in New York. Look at the mass deaths here in Houston, Texas. Look at the mass deaths in Miami, Florida, Los Angeles, California. They came to our suburban neighborhoods. We need to ban Islam. We need to fight back. And the conservatives will fall for it and start sporadic attacks against their fellow neighbor, employing the tactics in this manual. Moment is life. Movement is life. There is no life for a soul trapped in military traditions or mind frozen under military principles. In other words, traditions. Honored traditions of great military superpowers. Great commanders are those who study military principles and break them based on intuition and genius. They have open horizons and are the ones who create the principles of war that they have no horizon. Do not let the enemy surprise your study the terrain. This is really key. Please pay attention. This is the key part of the second chapter. Do not let the enemy surprise your study the terrain. Know the enemy. Know yourself. Assess your capabilities. Gather historical experiences. Carefully examine them and give them time to be digested. Consult with leaders of contemporary changes. Design the philosophy of future warfare. Send reconnaissance teams. Identify the battlefield. Harmonize with nature. Integrate with your weapon. Read the enemy's intentions and trap them at the right angle. In other words, what this is saying is that be experienced in the terrain of the battlefield in which you are going to be deployed to. They were probably here already, or they have reconnaissance teams reporting back to the attack teams. Hey, look at this. In other words, they probably have pictures of areas where there are least amounts of security or police or military presence. This is where most people are. This is where we can escape to. This is where we can attack from. So that means that they are already here or just getting here and studying the horizon of the different cities or whatever they're attacking from. The element of surprise. And that's why I find this manual to be highly, highly important to read and for me to break this down for you and for you to be prepared about the mind of the enemy and how they're studying us. But the key thing is the aftermath. How will we respond? Will we respond with aggression, emotional aggression against them or against ourselves? Well, you could take one look and we're not even under attack yet, and look how we're treating ourselves. There's a guy running here in New York City before I leave named Zoran Mandani. He's a Muslim communist. And that's just, for the conservatives, it's just like, wow, this guy is going to destroy New York City. It's 9/11. he doesn't care. And they're already comparing him to bin Laden and to every other, and to Satan and, whatever. If an attack happens here in New York and he's the mayor, what do you think is going to happen? And this is not, look, I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy, reading these documents and files to you. It doesn't take a genius to see what is coming and what may come in the aftermath. I think it's more predictable to see the aftermath than it is for the terrorist attack. But the warning signs are there. I'm not alone. The National Counterterrorism Center is warning us. Al-Qaeda wants to attack. The leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Saad al-Awlaki, has made it known that he wants to attack the United States and kill the president, the defense secretary, the vice president, secretary of state. How does he plan to do that? Abroad? No, here. That's a hint. We have to be prepared. I'm not saying you have to be paranoid. Live your life. But be ready. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next week.